Winslow Homer began as a newspaper illustrator, but after the Civil War, he would become a painter. He's going to be caught up in the conservative art of the post-war period. Of course, as I've mentioned in the past, when we fall into a period of war, as we come out of it, people are more interested in comfort and nostalgia than they are in art that's going to push the bounds. So his work is both nostalgic and generally hopeful. The piece we're looking at is going to be Veteran in a New Field. Now, this is painted after the war. Here we see a veteran basically harvesting wheat. The uniform and canteen in the lower right identify the man as a veteran, as if the role of soldier has been cast aside. And he's involved in meaningful work, implying a smooth transition from war. Now, there was concern at the time regarding transitioning so many to civilian life. The single-blade scythe was out of use at this time, so it's symbolic, and in this case, symbolic of death, those the soldier killed on the battlefield. You'll also notice the multiple blades are painted out. Now, that multiple blade scythe would have been far more common in reality at the time, around the end of the Civil War. But it doesn't have the same symbolism, so Homer will eventually paint it out. So what are we seeing? Homer is basically tapping into societal fears at the time. Society fears that these Civil War veterans, these combat-hardened soldiers, might come back, find themselves without jobs or particularly unhappy, and might rise up against the government. And of course, we have somewhere in the order of 500,000 to 1 million soldiers who are coming back or who are veterans at the time. We have huge numbers of veterans. And that's important because if they all rise up, they all already understand combat, well, it's not going to be a good situation. And so he's hoping for a peaceful transition. This is 1865. That's not entirely obvious that it's going to be a peaceful transition. And so we see him having cast aside his soldierly duties and focusing on farming. And by the way, this should sound familiar. It's very similar to Houdin's sculpture of George Washington, where he's depicted as a gentleman farmer rather than as a Revolutionary War general. So very similar idea, sort of pushing that idea that the veteran can cast aside that little bit of his life and move on. And we know that that transition isn't this easy. But again, we're simplifying things. He's trying to be nostalgic and hopeful. So he's not dealing with the sordid details of what might be there, of the PTSD or whatever else this man may suffer from. So we have a very simple image. And then there's one other thing to look at, the very loose brushwork. It looks detailed when you look at it from afar, but as we get up close, you can see that all of the brushwork is very, very quick. And it gives it a sense of energy, which is interesting because it's a very tranquil image. It's an interesting juxtaposition, maybe getting at the concerns of society, but also getting at Homer's style, another predecessor of Impressionism, which will be happening in Europe at the time, but it's not going to cross the Atlantic for a little while.